Hey pals, welcome back to a new video. Today I thought we would take it kind of easy. I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on Throneless while also doing a bit of an art thing while I'm working. So I'm going to be working and talking. So it's like a devlog / paint with me sort of thing. For today's episode, we will be working on some portraits for the game. Now Throneless is of course an RPG, and being a tactics RPG, the character models or the character sprites aren't very large on screen in battles and in general. So these dialogue portraits really make up a lot of the gaps for what the character is in terms of just expressing who they are and their personality, that kind of thing. So I've already got the Ranger done and the Knight is almost done. And today we're going to be working on the Witch while we talk a little bit about where the project's at. So let's get into it. You can see here, this is an example of what the text kind of looks like in the game. So we've got the characters here. I obviously love having the character popping off the top here, coming from underneath. I've been really leaning towards this kind of royal, gilded, filigree effect around the UI. And with some clever layering, I think this looks really nice. So, Throneless, how's it been going? I have been really happy with the progress that I've been making so far on the project. This is probably the fastest I've ever built anything. The game during Ludum Dare was actually insane in terms of how fast it came together, and I don't think I've really been able to match that pace at all. There's this weird phenomenon when you're working on a Ludum Dare game where you seem to be able to build things way faster than you normally would, and it's not just because you're putting in more hours. What tends to happen in Ludum Dare is that you end up building things that don't really scale that well, and it's harder because you don't get to take advantage of any of those shortcuts that you take advantage of during the jam. So for example, all of the hard-coded menus and things like that don't carry across. You basically need to be able to make design changes and iterations, and when you're in Ludum Dare, getting something in is enough. But here, it needs to be kind of at a professional standard and something that people would want to pay money for. So I just want a little bit of help here getting her face right. So the project in general, it's gone, like I said, quite quickly, although I think, as usual, I've given myself a scope that's really difficult to match. I think I've decided that the games that I like to make, they tend to be at least, it's closer to like 3 to 5 month projects, to be honest. So with this project so far, I've definitely been finding that the procedural stuff that I worked on during Arrowbound has been a real help with this. I remember when I worked on Arrowbound, the first month or so at least, was dedicated to working on this tool that I thought would really help me make the game. So it was kind of like a procedural jump calculator. So it would like let the game play itself. And to be honest, it wasn't really something that ever made it into the game or that I used very often when working on the game. It was sort of like a tech demo thing that I thought was really cool, but at the end of the day, it wasn't very useful for what I was working on. I found that the procedural stuff for Throneless has been quite painless. I've only been spending, we're only a month into the project, and I would say of the time that I've spent, everything that I've worked on has gone into the project. There have only been really 1 or 2 major directional changes that I've had to make since the project started. And granted, I've been keeping the design of the game quite free form. I haven't been putting too many restrictions on it. This is one of those projects where I'm just willing to find the fun. I'm not trying to force it into being something that isn't going to work if it's not going to be fun. So I'm going to see if I can release it on Steam and maybe mobile as well. And I'm going to treat it like it's just a paid piece of software. I'm not going to go too far into trying to make it, ad driven or anything like that. I just want to make a fun game that's worth people's money. So the first and major thing that I've had to really consider since starting the project is the roguelike elements. Now, of the feedback that I got from Ludum Dare, I think the biggest piece of feedback was, apart from the bugs, I guess the battles themselves. The game really finds itself in a position when you add the roguelike element of having every character move at the same beat and on the same turn. It makes it really difficult to calculate what you should be doing next turn and have that not just change literally 1 turn later. So you might have a character who's on low HP and, he's got 3 archers trained on him. What does he do? you could try to run away, but you're not going to get very far with 3 archers facing you. It's truer to real life, honestly, but it's one of those situations where this doesn't lead to a fun time, right? Even if it's more realistic. So what I think players really want, when I'm playing the game really want, is more opportunities to have creative decisions that turn the tables in my favor, right? If I'm going to put time into making some strategic decision, I want to have the confidence that that decision's actually going to occur and play out the way that I wanted it to, so that I can be rewarded for that good decision making. After probably like 3 weeks of maintaining the prototype in this roguelike state, I pivoted, I think like last week, into just having it be a straight tactics game. Now there are still a few little flavor shifts that I thought I would put in for my own sake, just because I wanted the game to have its own identity. And those take the form of the energy points. So as a roguelike, the game had this mechanic in it where certain moves would have a charge time. Instead, I thought I would shift that over to having it be based on energy. So certain moves would require energy points to execute them. Now, as a normal straight kind of RPG, what this equates to is something a lot closer to like action points in a D&D style game. And as I've currently got it set up, your movement and your actions all pull from the same pool. So if you want to run and then turn around and attack somebody, you can do that. Or you might have limited options of your attacks if you've spent points running on that same turn. There's also kind of an interesting mechanic where I'm thinking of having there be options to underspend your points. So you don't have to spend all of your points every turn. And underspending allows you to basically change the initiative order between that character's next turn by spending those unspent points to shift their order in the list, in the initiative list, which kind of makes sense, right? They didn't do that much last turn, so they've got a little bit of initiative left over, so they can kind of, execute on that next turn. By that same extension, there are also ways to sort of overspend the amount of energy that you have. If you have any energy left, you can still use any action, but that amount of points that you were in debt by will be subtracted from the amount of energy that you gain on the next turn. So as far as the procedural elements of the game go, I've been spending a lot of time on a sort of dungeon generation algorithm, and this is fairly straightforward. It's basically taking a series of predetermined kind of like level blocks. So these are basically arenas that you would find in a tactics game, and they're designed in such a way that they have a certain number of exits and entries, and those become essentially the same as like a jigsaw puzzle. Basically what I've done is just create different arenas for each of those configurations, and then worked on modularizing those with random enemy spawn positions and things like that. So the levels themselves are going to have quite a little bit of variety, just in terms of like what you can come across in terms of enemies, and the environment will change a little bit. So I can do tile swaps, so I can have different seasons, maybe like a winter season and a summer one, or maybe different biomes, things like that. And of course the dungeons themselves are totally rearranged every time. So I can scale the size of the dungeons, I can make them have a side length of 50. The dungeons themselves are grids, and they can be scaled to be more or less linear as well. The algorithm that I use to generate the dungeon layouts is, I don't know how novel it is. I mean, I would say it's something that's similar to how just normal pathfinding works. It's kind of like a little bit of a breadth first search, but it's actually creating the space as it's searching out. It's hard to explain here, but basically what it's doing is plotting a bunch of random points in the grid and then spiraling from one point to the next, trying to just find the nearest point. And it does that until it reaches a predetermined end position. Then I sprinkle a couple more random rooms on, and then join those rooms with the existing pathway. That way you can have branches coming off, and they can loop around, and you get lots of different configurations that are just pretty organic and random. changing things like the density and the amount of nodes in each of those passes. So, in that initial go versus the second pass around changes, how networked it is. And honestly, this came together in like a day. It was really, really quick. I was like kind of astonished that it came together as quickly as it did. Beyond that, I've been doing a little bit more work on the actual enemy AI behavior state trees. So in the games that I make, as far as like Insignia and now Throneless, not the case in Arrowbound, but in these last two games that I've been working on, I've been working through this idea of creating enemy behaviors using state trees. And what these are essentially just a list of things that the character can do. And every time the character's finished what they're doing, they pick a new option of those things. And the things are defined as states. And each state is a tree of smaller states. So for example, I have one state that's called engage for a melee attack. What it does is it has a state called chase, and that chase has a navigate. It executes navigate until it reaches a position that's within range of its attack, and then it switches states to the attack state, does the attack, and then goes back to chasing. So a character will do this until its target is defeated, and then it will finish its engage state and go back to whatever else makes sense. That can be just picking a new target, or it can be navigating somewhere else on the map. And they're probabilistically chosen, so some of them is randomized, but I also have a little bit of a value called priority. So each state, when a new state is rolled, each state can say, hey, what I want to do is really, really important right now, so prioritize me over any other state. So wandering around the map has a very low priority. So say if you're the healer and one of your allies has critical HP, then healing that ally will be a high priority and is most likely to be what you choose next. So outside of the dungeon generator and the AI, the other major thing that I've been working on in recent weeks has been the town. So it's super common in roguelike games for there to be some persistent progression, even though there's permadeath and you restart every time you die. Modern roguelikes have a very common mechanic of giving you something that's persistent between runs. And in Throneless's case, that's the village. So the major mechanic in this game outside of the combat is you have this town that starts very, very empty. And as you go through the dungeons, you recruit new characters. And some of those characters are vendors, like a blacksmith or a bowyer or, a chaplain, a priest or something like that. And every time you rescue one of these vendors, they go back to the town. And you can actually place their buildings in this growing town. So in a way, there's like a city building aspect, kind of a hub world for you to upgrade your characters. So the blacksmith will give you some kind of quasi quests. And when you achieve those quests, you get upgrades that are permanent for all of your knight class characters. The bowyer gives you upgrades for your ranger and so on. So this is something that I also needed to create a really kind of interesting data structure in order to basically even develop the thing that I was trying to do for this. Now, the way it works, because I only want you to be able to place plots of terrain in very specific areas, that is on the edges of the existing town. So you start with like one block, and as you go out, you can add new blocks, but they have to be on the outskirts of the existing town. You can't replace blocks, and you can't place blocks that you can't walk to. So I created this data structure that I'm sure exists somewhere, but I didn't know what it was called before I did this, so I gave it my own name. I called it a quad graph. So it's basically the same principle as like a linked list or even a tree to an extent, except it's linked in 2 dimensions. So just like in the actual dungeon itself, every node has a north, south, east, and west neighbor or door that it can join onto. And when we add new nodes, they get neighbored up to the existing nodes. And the data structure was something that I built pretty quickly. It took about a day as well, and it worked almost perfectly the first time. So I've been very fortunate with the work that I've been doing that I've managed to just get it right first try, with this kind of stuff. I don't know what it is exactly that I've changed to make this, to figure this stuff out, but I'm really grateful that it's taken less time than I thought it would to get these things in the game. From here, there is so much work to do still, of course. One of the hardest things that I've still got to do that's just looming over me is the amount of, basically just the amount of production art that needs to be done. So these character sprites and portraits, the animations, the attacks, and the effects that go on those attacks, they're still very much work in progress and need to be done. So I'm taking my weekends, as you can see, trying to just make as much of a dent in that stuff as I can. There of course remain even mechanics things that need to be done. So just getting a town structure working that lets you place buildings down is one thing. The next thing is formulating a kind of RPG that allows you to unlock these things in such a way that it's fun and also has a lot of polish in each of the areas. So for example, what does it look like when you add a new block to the town? I don't want it to just pop in. I want it to have some kind of animation associated with it, and what's it like when you meet a new vendor, like a blacksmith? Is there some dialogue that plays? How does the game transition from you standing in front of the vendor in the wilderness and allowing you to place that in your town? Does the game kind of do like a fade away? Does this happen in a new scene? Does it happen when you get back after you finished your dungeon? It's a lot of little design choices that really have to do with just experience design and polish, rather than just raw mechanics. I mean, a lot of these things can just be done one way or another, and it doesn't really matter which way you do them, but the execution is really, really important. I find for this kind of game, whether it's Throneless or even Arrowbound before it, this idea of giving players an interesting series of things to do is really important. Having the actual process of them going through the game orchestrated out is one of the hardest things. Beyond building the mechanics and beyond just having it be functional, having it be fun is so hard, especially in the month. That's the hardest part, is getting the rest of this stuff done inside of a month is going to be really, really difficult. I'm actually quite confident that what I'm working on is going to be fun when it's done. It's just a question of how much work is between where it's at now and fun. That's the scary part. It's very easy to get lost doing this kind of work. That's not so bad. She does have the most of what I was trying to go for here as far as her features. I really, really am very fond of this idea of darkening the space between the bottom of the chin and where the nose points out. This space right here, very, very effective just to darken that off. It allows you to create a lot of contrast where the bottom of the nose would be. If the whole face is covered in the same light, if it's lit from the front, it's very, very difficult to create a nose without isolating the actual shape of the nose with like a line like this. Okay, but because we have shadow on one half of the face, we can create contrast to show that shape. And I really much prefer doing that. As you can see here with the tactics portraits, they are so featureless. And it takes a lot to just very, very subtly create that sense of character in their face or characteristics, like scars or things like that. Very, very difficult. I think it's best to always use your own creative license. So at the end of the day, I am trying to make my own thing here. I don't want to stick too close to the Final Fantasy Tactics style. So as I said, I've been very happy with how these have been coming along. I think I'm a very visual person. And I really appreciate when something looks good. I know that as a developer though, it's often better to just try to implement things first, get them in the game, and then make them look good. But because of that, it means that the creative side gets kind of starved sometimes, or at least the visual side, the part of me that really, really likes being able to say, ah, perfect, you know, that looks really hot. You know, that part of me can't do its job when I'm stuck just developing stuff. I mean, the engineering side can, you know, I can enjoy the fact that something works well, but until it looks good, you know, the player inside of me finds it very difficult to just be at ease, you know? So doing work like this makes me feel very comfortable because I kind of can see it, you know, I can actually see it coming together. And on this character portrait alone, you know, if the portrait looks really, really good, it makes me want to play the game. It makes me want to make the game. I'm sometimes working when I'm developing something, I'm thinking of it as a player as much as I am as a developer. Ah, that's where I was missing it. Seeing the white of the eye here before you see that line. Yes. I've been learning a lot about outlines in the last year, I think. It's been one of those things where I've just kind of started to work it more into my stuff, and I've been very, very happy with the results. It's kind of easy to forget, you know, that you're on a journey. It's very easy to just kind of think, oh, my art's not good enough, and it needs to be better, and why am I not as good as this person, or anything like that. It's very easy to do that. But when you look at the progress that you're making, it's, on the flip side, very easy to be grateful, you know, that you've made such progress. I find, yeah, I much prefer being grateful than bitter. So I try to be mindful of, like, yeah, my improvements and just how things are going as often as possible. I recently watched this movie called Soul. It's a Pixar movie. And when I watched that movie, something that was brought up that I never really thought about before was this idea that passion can turn into obsession if you let it. And that obsession can take all the positivity that you get out of something and turn it into negativity. As soon as you're doing something because you need to, not because you want to, it starts becoming a drain. And this is something that I've been battling with for a long time. You know, when it comes to being a game developer as a job, you know, and the stress and pressure that comes with trying to build an audience and trying to be worthy of making, you know, games full time. Yeah, there are a lot of talented people out there. Who gets to decide whether I'm the person who gets to do it full time, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's very easy to think of it as like a race against time to be better than myself. And unfortunately, that's just not a very healthy way to think. And so this idea of not allowing myself to be ungrateful and to not allow myself to get obsessed by the work has been really helpful. I try to think of Soul whenever I can. It's a really, really good movie, actually, if you haven't seen it before. There are a couple of movies that I've been watching recently, actually, that deal with this. The other one is called Kiki's Delivery Service. I really like Studio Ghibli films, and I had never seen Kiki, but having watched it in the same way that Soul did, it really affected me because, yeah, it really deals with burnout, right? And being a creative person and what it means when you're following a passion and you're expecting results and you're not seeing them immediately. That kind of stuff is just, for every artist, you know, it's something that we go through, and it can be something that people who don't do creative work for a living don't really understand because it seems so counterintuitive. Like, you get to do this all day, right? I get to make games all day. Sure, but anything that's a job can be stressful if you let it. So yeah, those are my two movie picks for burnout. I'm sure most of you have seen Kiki's Delivery Service if you like anime, and as I draw a witch right now, it's something that I'm sure you have some memories with. But for those of you who haven't seen it, you should check it out. I cry very easily in films, and I cried watching that movie. I always find that at the beginning stages of these kinds of portraits, especially when I'm doing the eyes, I get kind of creeped out because, you know, it's very easy to make it not look very good, especially when you hit that uncanny valley. But invariably, you know, if I give it a bit of time, I end up getting there. So from here to the end, the biggest challenges are really going to be around creating bosses and developing like a really clear story for the game that is traceable not only through the narrative structure, but through the actual gameplay elements. So balancing the game so that players, when they are building their town, are going through the peaks and troughs of, losing parties and building new ones and slowly building their town without the gameplay feeling stale or slowing down or being too chaotic either. So I will be working on this probably for the next 4 weeks, and during that time I hope that I have the opportunity to do some kind of a beta test, and patrons and subscribers to the Twitch channel will definitely be invited to that beta test. I'll be figuring out some way to hand out code downloads or something like that in the near future. As far as platforms go, I think Steam is probably going to be the primary platform, so I'll be putting the game out on Steam first, and that's probably where we'll do the betas, and then maybe heading over to mobile after that. So this is what the character select screen is looking like so far. It's still pretty early on, but at the beginning of the game you get the option to choose between one of 3 characters. They have random stat natures as well as initial values. I've pulled from Pokemon a little bit with kind of like EVs and IVs. So you have the opportunity to pick a character, and as you meet new characters in the wilderness and in the dungeons, you can sort of like pick and choose characters that have the natures that you want that will eventually grow into kind of like min-maxed and optimized versions of those characters. So I hope you enjoyed watching this little look into Throneless. This has been the first Game Dev Journal post Ludum Dare. I will be posting probably one more before release, and talking through the developments that I made in that time. If you have any questions about the development or anything that you'd like to see in future tutorials, let me know and I'll get on that. I should mention I am planning tentatively to do a bit of a programming tutorial. This is C# programming for Unity that will assume nothing. So it will be a from scratch tutorial, completely beginner, all the way through to teaching you how to code your own game classes and your own games in Unity. This is something that might take a bit of time to prepare correctly. There are plenty of channels on YouTube that have covered this territory quite well. So if I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and do the same sort of thing, I think it should be really high quality. So keep in mind, if the upload rate slows a little bit over the next couple of months, I'm probably spending a bit of my time preparing for that eventual series. So thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one, and until then. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice. Thanks again, and until next time.